Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm Pat.
And I'm Jessie. It's great to be here.
We're really glad you could join us today. We're diving into something that, well, it touches a lot of lives.
hmm You've probably felt it or maybe seen it happen, that interaction that leaves you feeling off, confused, maybe a bit frustrated.
Yeah, like you're trying to read between the lines, but the lines keep shifting. This deep dive is all about looking really closely at communication, especially when frustrations aren't voiced directly.
We're going to unpack passive-aggressive behavior today.
Exactly. Our plan is to look at what it actually is, try to understand, why people do it, see the real impact it has, and then, importantly, explore how we can navigate it better.
Right. Whether you find yourself dealing with it from others or maybe even notice some of those tendencies in yourself sometimes.
So let's start right at the beginning. What is passive aggression, according to the materials we looked at?
Well, the core idea is that it's an indirect way of expressing negative feelings. Things like anger, resentment, maybe hostility.
But instead of just saying, hey, I'm angry about this or that hurt, it comes out sideways.
Precisely. It's channeled through more subtle, kind of covert actions. Think defiance, maybe resistance, sometimes even just neglect.
Okay, so give us some examples. What does that look like in practice?
One really common one is intentionally not following through on something.
The classic forgetting.
Exactly. As one source put it, rather than actually saying they don't want to do a task, the person just doesn't do it.
Right. The task that mysteriously vanishes from the to-do list after they agreed to it.
Or it could be driven by excuses, lots of excuses. The thing is, the excuse isn't the real reason. It's just the passive way to avoid saying what they really want or need.
Yeah. And that one, so many of us know someone saying, I'm fine, when everything about them, their tone, their body language, just screams the opposite.
That's a big one, a real hallmark sign. The specific ways it shows up can really vary from person to person.
But the common thread is that indirectness, that hidden negative feeling coming out in a way that's hard to pin down.
Exactly. The underlying pattern is the same.
Okay, so if that's what it is, the big question is why? Why go that route? Why not just be direct? It seems, well, less effective in the long run.
This is where it gets complex, and the sources really encourage looking at it with some empathy. It seems the key thing is that for the person doing it, being direct with that difficult feeling, anger, disappointment, whatever it is, it just feels too risky, too threatening, maybe unsafe in that moment.
So being indirect feels like the safer bet than, say, being vulnerable or starting a conflict.
Yes. And a lot of the research points back to childhood. Often people learned this communication style growing up.
How so?
Maybe they saw it modeled in their home, or they got messages, subtle or not so subtle, that expressing their own needs or wants was, I don't know, inconvenient, or maybe they weren't entitled to ask for things.
So if you learned early on that saying what you need or feel angry about leads to, like, punishment or getting shut down.
That's a really powerful lesson, isn't it? If parents reacted badly with anger, punishment, dismissal when a child was direct, it can create this deep fear around expressing needs or anger later on. It can really boil down to a fear of vulnerability.
And because it's learned so early, the sources suggest they might not even be fully conscious of it being manipulative. They might genuinely think they're just avoiding a fight or protecting someone's feelings or even keeping their job.
Right, it might just feel like the normal way to handle things or the only way they know how. It's interesting, passive-aggressive personality disorder used to be a diagnosis people talked about. Yeah, but it's actually not a formal diagnosis anymore. Still, the behavior pattern itself is very real and can definitely be a significant trait in how someone interacts.
That reframes it a bit, doesn't it? Seeing it less as pure malice and more as a sort of learned but ultimately unhelpful coping strategy.
But that doesn't mean it doesn't have a real impact. Let's talk about that. How does this behavior affect the people experiencing it?
Yeah, because it's not happening in a vacuum. What are the effects?
Well, the immediate feelings are often things like confusion, definitely frustration, feeling kind of slighted or dismissed, and honestly just feeling drained.
Exhausting. You're constantly trying to decode the silences, the sarcastic comments, the
Yeah.
mixed messages.
Totally. And the sources are really clear. When this is a consistent pattern, it does serious damage to relationships over time.
How so? In personal relationships.
It just breeds resentment and mistrust. Because the real issues, the actual feelings underneath, they never get talked about openly. They just kind of sit there and fester.
And that lack of directness must create a huge emotional gap.
Absolutely. The person on the receiving end can feel really invalidated, They try to address the tension maybe, but get met with denial. What are you talking about? I'm fine. Or they feel confused because they sense something's wrong but can't get clarity.
Or even unloved, maybe. If there's this constant negative vibe they can't fix.
Yeah, that too. It becomes this awful cycle of unspoken stuff, unspoken frustrations, and it just weakens the whole foundation of the relationship. Makes resolving any conflict almost impossible. And yeah, bitterness can definitely set in when it goes on and on.
And what about in families, where the bonds are often deeper and the history longer?
The impact there can be really profound. Sources talk about significant emotional strain, creating this whole family culture where miscommunication is the norm, and expressing real feelings is discouraged.
Leading to everyone just bottling things up.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Suppressed emotions, long-term resentments that can simmer for years, even fractured relationships, and a real lack of genuine emotional closeness.
And I guess kids growing up in that environment learn those same patterns.
Unfortunately, yes. These communication styles can easily become generational. It's a heavy legacy.
Wow. And it's not just personal life, right? The sources mentioned this is a big issue in the workplace, too. Described it as, what, endemic and harmful.
Yes, just as damaging, potentially as more obvious, overt aggression.
How does passive aggression play out at work?
Well, colleagues can feel constantly worn down by it. The indirectness, the forgetting tasks, maybe subtle sabotage, even veiled criticisms in meetings.
Ugh, that sounds tough to navigate professionally.
It really is. It can lead to someone getting a reputation for being difficult or uncooperative, maybe even being ostracized, just because people find their way of communicating so draining and unproductive. It creates a really toxic environment.
Yeah, definitely not productive.
Yeah. And, to really get a feel for the human cost, the sources shared some really powerful personal stories. They paint such a vivid picture.
Yeah, those anecdotes definitely bring it home. That one about the father's Christmas gift prank was striking.
Oh, right. Nesting an expensive gift inside, what was it, multiple sealed cans?
Yeah, and the wife struggling to open them while the family laughed. But the key insight was the author realizing later the laughter wasn't with her.
It was more about relieving tension for everyone else and maybe subtly putting her down, humiliating her. That hidden layer beneath what looked like a joke is chilling.
It totally changes the dynamic from funny to kind of cruel. Or that other story, the one about the mashed potato fight.
Right, where the mother apparently took the brunt of it.
Again, it highlights how something that might seem playful on the surface can feel really targeted or unfair to the person absorbing the impact. It shows how passive aggression can hide right out in the open.
And that really intense story about the brother who slapped himself.
Oh yeah, to make it look like the author had hit him. That was wild.
He slapped himself hard enough to leave red marks, screamed, and the dad immediately got furious at the author, punching a wall.
And the author's first thought was almost detachment. Wow, glad that's not me.
Followed by seeing the brother laughing afterward. It's such a stark example of manipulation creating chaos, directing blame, all without ever having to directly say, I'm angry at you.
These stories really open a window.
Right.
We also looked into some online discussions, people sharing their own experiences pretty openly.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk about how triggering it can be when you're on the receiving end.
Absolutely. Someone described it making them spiral, feeling angry because they see the pattern, but then panicky because trying to address it leads to denial.
That feeling of being stuck, like you just have to endure it because you can't actually resolve it with the other person.
Yes. That feeling of your reality being denied, like your own perceptions don't matter, it's incredibly isolating when they just won't admit there's even a problem.
It really is. And someone else pointed specifically to the I'm fine response when it's obviously not true. They called it gaslighting.
Making you doubt yourself, yeah.
Making you question if you're imagining the tension because their words don't match the feeling at all.
We saw work examples there too, right? Like a manager complaining about someone to their colleagues.
Yes. Instead of just talking to the person directly, that kind of thing destroys team trust so quickly.
And then there were some really poignant shares too, like someone realizing they were repeating the same passive-aggressive patterns they hated in their parents.
That's got to be a tough realization, looking in the mirror and seeing that.
Definitely. Someone else even called passive aggression their mother tongue.
Wow.
Yeah, like the default communication style they grew up with and how easily they slip back into it under stress, even when they're trying not to. It shows how deep these habits run.
And some really painful relationship examples came up too. That story about the spouse using all those tactics.
Oh man, yeah. The one-word answers, ignoring. Shushing, walking
Yeah.
away mid-sentence.
Forgetting favors, using a diagnosis against them in arguments, locking access to shared money. Just awful.
The person sharing felt so incredibly lonely and was even questioning if leaving was selfish, because that's how the partner was framing it.
It really highlights how these behaviors can just slowly, insidiously erode a relationship over time. It's not always one big blow up.
These stories just hammer home how important it is to figure out how to handle this stuff. So for people dealing with it from others, what kind of strategies did the sources suggest?
Okay, first step seems to be awareness. Really recognizing the pattern in that specific person. What does their passive aggression usually look like? Is it procrastination, sarcasm, the silent treatment?
Kind of learning their specific tell.
Exactly, spotting the pattern. The sources did mention that sometimes in lighter situations, maybe humor can help to diffuse tension or gently point out the behavior. But you have to be careful with that one.
Right, by backfire. So what's the main approach recommended?
Overwhelmingly, it's about assertive, clear, direct communication.
Okay. So being really straightforward.
Yeah, objective and straightforward. And using I statements or me statements is highly recommended. Like, when you did X, I felt Y.
Instead of you always do Z.
Right. Focusing on your experience and feelings which are valid and hard to argue with rather than making accusations that immediately put the other person on the defensive.
That makes sense. It shifts the focus. What about in professional settings?
The sources suggested practical things like putting agreements in writing or maybe having a third-party witness for important conversations. Just ways to create clarity and accountability when dealing with someone indirect.
Documentation, basically.
And there was one perspective that I found really interesting, this idea of just refusing to engage with the subtext.
What do you mean?
Like, if they won't say it directly, you don't respond to the implied message. You act as if you only heard the literal words.
Huh. So if they say, fine, do whatever you want in that tone, you just say, okay, thanks, and proceed.
Sort of, yeah. It's not about being naive. It's about protecting your own energy. You essentially force them to be direct if they actually want their underlying feeling or need addressed. You're not playing the guessing game anymore.
That puts the responsibility back on them to communicate clearly.
It can. Another strategy is calmly setting boundaries and stating consequences if the behavior continues. But realistically, the sources also warn that confrontation, even calm, direct confrontation.
Well, it might just lead to more denial or defensiveness. Yeah, you can't force someone to engage, honestly.
Exactly. And sometimes, sadly, especially at work, if it's really persistent and affecting your mental health, the sources acknowledge that documenting everything and maybe even considering leaving the job is a difficult but necessary step some people have to take.
Recognizing you might need to remove yourself from the situation to protect your well-being.
Right. You can't control their behavior, only your response and your environment.
Okay, so that's for dealing with others. What about if you're the one recognizing these patterns in yourself? How do you start changing your own passive-aggressive habits?
This is tough work, definitely. And it really starts with self-awareness. Just recognizing when hidden anger or fear or resentment is bubbling up, that's the crucial first step.
And not judging the anger itself.
Right. The sources frame anger not as inherently bad, but more like a messenger. It's signaling that maybe a need isn't being met or a boundary has been crossed. It's information.
So listen to the message instead of just shoving it down or letting it leak out sideways.
Exactly. And then connecting the dots, linking your triggers to your actions. One suggestion was actually writing things down, like, when did I feel angry or resentful today, and how did I react? That can help you see the patterns you might be blind to.
Like keeping a little communication journal.
Sort of, yeah. And mindfulness practice comes up too. Just being more present and aware of your emotions, your thoughts, your physical sensations, your behaviors in the moment. That awareness gives you a crucial pause.
A pause to choose a different response instead of the automatic passive-aggressive one.
Precisely. And the core advice, really, woven through all the sources, is simple but hard. Use your words.
Huh. Easier said than done sometimes.
Totally. But passive aggression is basically a failure to say what's really going on inside. So maybe try writing out what you want to communicate first. That can help clarify things for yourself before you try to say it out loud.
Like drafting an email before sending it.
Kind of. And using those when you did X, I felt Y statements for yourself too. It's a structure that helps express your feelings about a specific behavior without starting a fight about intentions. Like you said, they can argue about why they did something, but they can't really argue with how it made you feel.
Right. Your feeling is your truth.
And knowing how to apologize genuinely if you slip up, because it probably will happen, is important.
What does a good apology look like in this case?
Acknowledge the specific passive-aggressive thing you did, express real remorse for the impact it had, maybe briefly explain the trigger not as an excuse, just context, and then offer to make amends or talk about how to communicate better next time.
It sounds like pretty deep work, maybe something that needs outside help.
Oh, absolutely. Therapy or counseling came up as a really valuable resource. It can help uncover those deeper roots, the fears, the past stuff that fuel the behavior, and it's a safe place to practice new, more direct ways of relating to people.
So confronting this in yourself, it's challenging, but the sources suggest it's possible and worthwhile.
Very much so. They suggest that finding the courage to do this, even though it's hard, can lead to really significant growth, more authenticity in your life, and much healthier, stronger relationships.
Definitely not the easy way out, but maybe the way toward real connection.
I think that's the idea.
Wow. Okay,
Mhm.
this deep dive has really shown a light on how complicated passive aggression is, where it comes from, how it impacts us.
Yeah, understanding it, whether we see it in others or, catch glimpses of it in ourselves, it feels like a really crucial step towards having better, more honest connections.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening, something to chew on from all this. We heard that passive aggression often comes from a fear of vulnerability,
Hmm.
right? And we know it creates distance and frustration.
Hmm.
So the question to consider is, what could you actually gain, not just in your relationships, but maybe in your own sense of peace, if you found the courage to communicate directly, even when, maybe especially when, it feels really scary?
That's a powerful question to sit with. Maybe the answer is about feeling truly seen, truly understood, in a way that passive aggression just never allows.
We really hope this deep dive gave you some useful insights, maybe some tools to think about for navigating these tricky situations.
Thank you so much for tuning in and joining us today.
Yeah, thanks everyone. If you found this helpful, we'd love if you'd subscribe, maybe give it a like, or share it with someone who might find it valuable too.
And please feel free to leave a comment if your platform allows it. We genuinely love to hear your thoughts or experiences with this topic.
Until next time, keep diving deep.
Bye for now.